Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Local Review Body for 10th of June 2024. As normal, I will start by introducing my colleagues up here on the top table. I am Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the Local Review Body. To my left is Councillor David Illingworth. To my right, Councillor Dave Cuthbert. We are by requirement all members of the Planning Committee. To my far right is Mrs. Leslie Tierney. Mrs. Tierney is an independent property advisor, planning advisor, who has had no involvement with any of the cases prior to them coming forward to the Local Review Body. To my left, beyond Councillor Illingworth, is Mr. Colin Elliott, who is our legal advisor for this afternoon, and beyond him is Kirsty, who is from Committee Services. So next on the agenda, members, are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Illingworth?
None.
And Councillor Cuthbert?
I have no declarations, no.
Okay, thank you very much. We then come to the minutes of the last meeting. I'm happy to approve those, as I was the only member here who was on that last meeting, so they are approved. And with that, members, we will now move on to the first item on the agenda. We have a busy agenda this morning, this afternoon, so we'll get on with that straight away. Item 4.1, the first one on the agenda, is the change of use of flat to short-term let accommodation unit in retrospect at 1 Jubilee Place in Pitlochry. Mrs. Tierney, could you introduce that for us?
Thank you, convener. We'll just run through some slides to start with. So the application site here is defined with the red boundary around it. We'll come and zoom in on it a bit more detail. And then the next one. Oh, this is the floor plan of the property. So it's a 2-bedroom ground floor flat. The stairs that you see are actually a separate access to the upstairs flat. The ground floor flat here has got its own front door into the property. And you'll see there's a parking space that goes along with it just to the top left-hand side there. Next slide. So this is to give you a bit of an overview in terms of the location of the property. The yellow area there is really the town and neighbourhood centre, if you like, the centre of Pitlochry. The conservation area boundary is the dotted blue line. Not that that is particularly relevant in this case, it's more the fact that it's within this kind of white area out with the town centre, which is basically a residential area. Next slide, please. And then this is a Google map, so you can see, albeit it is a residential area, there's a number of guest house things in the area. Led to believe the site is a former curling rink area, and it was built set of affordable units. It's immediately adjacent to the access into the development, fronting onto a lower oak field, and then with a kind of communal courtyard area to the rear. Next slide, please. So this is the property in detail. So outlined with the box there, the ground floor property, just beside the entrance as you come into the development. Next slide, please. And then just the other view from Lower Oakfield, come along the road there. You can see the properties that front onto the street with the flat highlighted. Next slide. And this is as you come in to the access into the development. The first one there on the left-hand side, with the front door entrance within that box area, and then the access to the flat upstairs shown with the projecting porch area to the side. Next slide. This is looking at the property from the kind of communal access and courtyard area to the front. So you can see the outline of the flat there, and the parking space that's allocated to that property highlighted. And again, with the porch projecting to the front there for the access for the flat upstairs. Next slide, please. And this just gives you a view coming back so you can see the other residential properties in the development. Next slide. Thank you. So by way of introduction, property is a ground floor 2-bedroom flat located within a residential area of Pitlochry in the development built on the former curling rink, where there are 22 flats, which are a mix of affordable and private ownership. It has its own separate front door with access to the parking spaces. This application was refused on the 12th of December 2023 after the council approved the non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets. That guidance acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impact the loss of that property has on the availability of affordable housing for local people and impact on residential amenity, especially where the property is within a predominantly residential area, and there could be adverse impacts on amenity for existing residents, particularly in blocks with shared and communal entry. It also states proposals must comply with all relevant LDP2 policies, in particular Policy 1 placemaking, which states that development must contribute positively to the surrounding environment. So the reasons for refusal, firstly, that the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30 Tourism E of MPF 4, as the proposal will result in an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and 2, that the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And then number 2, the proposal is contrary to MPF 4 Policy 14C, Design Quality and Place, and Perth and Kinross LDP 2, Policies 1A and 1B, Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the short-term let accommodation would adversely impact on the amenity of residents of the flats, and the short-term let use is not compatible with the amenity and character of the existing residential development. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, they note there are 22 flats in a courtyard arrangement which provide for a quiet, private enclosed development with a central parking area. The development was purposely built to provide affordable housing and is within an area zoned for residential uses. 1 parking space is allocated to the 2-bedroom flat, and it would not be inconceivable for more than 1 car to be used by visiting guests. The proposed use would not be significantly different from a flat in terms of physical appearance, the extent of guest footfall or noise, so long as good management is in place. However, the expected high turnover of guests has the potential to increase disturbance to neighbouring residents, and this would contribute to a cumulative adverse impact on the residential character of the flatted development with communal shared areas of central parking and courtyard. The proposal would result in the loss of a flat to short-term letting in the PH16 postcode area, which is already subject to a proliferation of holiday accommodation. This would in turn adversely impact the availability of residential accommodation locally. There are economic benefits, not least to the applicant themselves and to local businesses who benefit from the custom of guests, but that this does not outweigh the loss of residential accommodation in this case. So in terms of the case made by the applicant, they submitted various information with the application when it was submitted, including that the flat is a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom main door access with parking for 1 car, and there's also space for visitors to park. As the flat is on the ground floor, it is accessible, and this means many bookings are from elderly and disabled visitors. They operate with a number of stipulations, including visitors being over 21, no young children, no pets, no parties, a quiet policy between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m, a maximum of 4 guests staying and being shut over Christmas and New Year. The property is maintained by caretakers who live nearby and is decorated, furnished and cleaned to a high standard. So since the submission of the appeal, a number of further points have been raised by the applicant, including that the STL has operated for 5 years without any issues, and the LRB has granted another approval on this basis. It has therefore also not been available as private residential accommodation already. In the PH16 postcode area, there are 4,000 properties and only 172 of these are registered as STLs. The sales market in Pitlochry is driven by second home buyers and older buyers, and the value of these properties alongside market factors means that even if the property is placed on the open market, it is unlikely to be purchased by someone deemed to have a housing need, such as a first-time buyer or those seeking affordable housing. The refusal of permission does not meet the terms of the LDP or the Council's housing strategy. Visitors spend their money locally, so it does contribute to the economy. The applicant has submitted an affidavit which speaks to the property not being allowed to be used as a party flat, and there is a curfew in place. As accessible or disabled friendly accommodation, as the applicant describes it, the property is only one of 7 properties able to offer this in the area. They suggest that refusal may give rise to a breach of the public sector equality duty placed on the local authority in terms of the Equality Act 2010. Refusal may also give rise to challenge in terms of human rights legislation as under the Human Rights Act 1998. They highlight other STL proposals which at the time of the submission had yet to be decided. And just to give you some feedback on those, 3 of those appeals were upheld, but they were done so on the basis on the location of the property being in a central, more mixed-use area and due to proximity to other non-residential uses. The 2 which were dismissed were in flatted developments in residential areas, and one of them was number 2 Jubilee Place, which is the flat upstairs from this property. They go on to say that the property is located in a predominantly residential area. However, there are no adverse impacts on amenity for existing residents, that the proposal does not relate to a residential property with 4 or more bedrooms. The applicant has detailed in their affidavit the criteria applicable to guests booking the property to ensure minimal disturbance to neighbours. It confirms that no police attendance has been required at the property, and they draw further attention to the fact that despite the vast number of neighbour notifications, no adverse representations have been made. The proposal is not for refurbishment of a long-term empty property. It is the applicant's position that there will be no impact on local amenity or character of the area by the proposal, which seeks to formalise the existing reality of how the property is being used. No construction work is envisaged as part of the proposal. It is not part of a diversification scheme. However, the granting of permission will ensure that visitors, particularly those with a disability, will be able to contribute to the local economy. This includes spending time and money at local rural diversification projects. If granted, it would encourage rural economic activity while safeguarding the service function of small towns such as Pitlochry, in keeping with NPF 4 Policy 29. There is no loss of accommodation. The property was not previously being occupied as a residential dwelling, and if granted, it's their position that it would not be placed on the market for sale or offered for long-term rent. It will continue to provide disabled-friendly accommodation to tourists and visitors to the area who contribute massively to the economy. In terms of other matters, there were no representations. Environmental Health does not object, but Communities Housing Strategy note that the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets is above the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of SDLs where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to questions. You answered my question, so that was done. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, convener. If this property were to be given permission as a short-term let, would it be possible for it to be let out on, say, a month-by-month basis for somebody perhaps working at the Festival Theatre?
Yes, councillor. If it has permission, it would be able to be used for that period of time for that use.
Just to kind of add to that, yes, that's possible, but that's more the operation of it. You wouldn't be controlling that. That's the point to make, is you would not be controlling the length. It is short-term let, so you could have, I know, 1-2 nights as well as a bit longer. But the point to make is you don't control that.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. I've got 3 questions. I think they're all for legal. The first one was, can we condition occupancy in terms of not allowing certain age groups, no large groups, no parties and so on? Is that something that can be put into a condition?
The answer to that would be no, because that's much more the operation of a business rather than the planning use, and it wouldn't meet the circular test, so no to that.
Thank you. The second question, is it your opinion that the Equalities Act 2010, is it relevant in this case?
Probably the best way to answer that, to give you an idea of what it is. The public sector that you're talking about, the duty upon the local authority. The public sector equality duty under the Equality Act 2010, public authority must, in exercise of its functions, have due regard to the need to firstly eliminate discrimination, harassment, victimisation and any other conduct that is prohibited by or under this Act. Secondly, advance equality of opportunity between persons who share a relevant protected characteristics and persons who do not share it. And thirdly, foster good relations between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it. There are more specific duties, and I can, in a subsidiary legislation, all I can say, I've looked through those, and those specific duties on authorities don't really apply in this circumstance. For example, duty to report progress on mainstreaming of the equality duty, and duty to assess and review policies and practices. I would just remind you that you're in a regulatory process here. So what you're doing is you're applying policy, and your primary duty is to look at the development plan and whether there are any other material considerations. That's the primary duty here. Probably that's probably about as much as I could say on that. Actually, it is an interesting yet difficult area. Yes.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I kind of understand why I'm here. It's just trying to get clarity and making sure that we're not contravening any sort of act. My third question was the Human Rights Act. Does it require us to consent this application? That seems to be the implication.
Human Rights Act obviously has got a very, very high level overlay. Again, what I would point out on here, and it's the same with actually the previous situation, you actually have an unauthorised use at the moment. So you don't actually have something that's settled at the moment. What you're looking at is you're being asked whether to permit it or not. In terms of the Human Rights Act, the very general thing, those rights are set within although those private rights are set within a public context, and therefore they're not necessarily absolute rights. You have to look at the individual circumstances. In terms of the two, balancing the two together, I would say that the public sector equality duty is probably a slightly more direct relevance than what the Human Rights Act. But again, remember your context, planning policy first.
Members, I have no questions now. So if I may, are we in a position that we can proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Ingworth.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
Also happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed on this one. This has been an interesting application with a well-documented appeal before us, but the central core of all these cases is the question of residential amenity. That's the heart of everything. And as we've heard from our property advisor, this property is in a residential area. It was intended to be a residential area, and to bring us short-term into it would be introducing effectively a commercial element into a residential area. Now, the appeal papers we have before us do outline several matters, which Mrs. Tierney's updated us on the results of those appeals. One they do highlight particularly is in Athol Road. However, that was on the main thoroughfare of Pitlochry and is not like for like. And beyond the main thoroughfare, the expectation of residential amenity there would be much lower than it is in the purely residential area. So coming to that, back to this case, on the residential side, another factor which I've been looking at is a recent appeal that went through on another property elsewhere. And although it was in Burnham and not here, the decisions that were made do apply to flatted properties. And the points that come up on here is that firstly, with our own local development plan, policy 17, it requires tourism proposals to be compatible with the amenity and character of the residential area. Coming back to residential amenity again, it also mentions that although there may be no antisocial behaviour reported, impacts on amenity and character are not limited to recorded incidences of antisocial behaviour. But the other main point is the intensification of movement of people by cars, by luggage, by people moving in and out of properties, which also has an effect on residential amenity. And taking all that into consideration, on this occasion, I'm proposing to refuse the appeal. Councillor Ingworth.
Thank you, convener. I'd like to approve the appeal. I think this, although it is in a residential area, it is on overlooks a street with 3 guest houses and hotels, and I'm not persuaded that the change in residential amenity will be affected significantly by having this as a short-term let.
Thank you very much. One thing, if I may just add, which I didn't put on my notes here, that I note there obviously a comment about the disabled access and the ability of disabled people to enter the property, but I do feel that that doesn't outweigh my decision to refuse the appeal. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. I side with you on this one. It's a flatted property. There's 1 car parking space provided with the accommodation. It's a residential area. I think it's not town centre, so my view is that there is a likelihood for a loss of amenity from this being consented. So I would refuse the appeal.
Mr. Elliott, we have a 2-to-1 majority on this one to refuse. One thing we didn't bring up, if I may, on the reasons for refusal given by the officer, there needs to be a slight amendment on there, I think, which is the policy 1B, but other than that, it's a 2-1 decision.
Yes, thank you, convener. Yes, I have 2-1 refusal, and taking you and Councillor Cuthbert to page 185, which is the original appointed officer's grounds of refusal. From what I heard you say, convener, ground 1 stays the same. And of course, you've given your reasoning previously as well, which you take into account. But ground 2, I think they changed there, instead of policies 1A and 1B, it just becomes policy 1A, which has been done before in other ones, because 1B has categories that don't apply here. Okay. Yep.
Thank you, members. We'll now move on to the second item on the agenda, which is item 4.2. This is also a change of use on a short-term let accommodation unit in retrospect, now at 34 Lagreach Bray in Pitlochry. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce that one.
Thank you, convener. We'll just go through the slides for this one as well. So location, you can see the main central area of Pitlochry there, and then as you move west, you're coming away from the town centre into a much more residential area, and there are a couple of roads that lead you down to the river with a number of houses in this area and the sites where the yellow star is. Next slide, please. And then this is just zooming in slightly closer. You can see the row of houses, or the end of the row of houses where the property is located, and that's in between the river basically and Putting Green and Cemetery. Next slide, please. So application site is outlined in red, and that includes the access road to the property and the parking to the front and round the edge of the property itself, number 34. Next slide, please. And then this is the site, the floor plan for the property. So 2 bedrooms, lounge, kitchen, bathroom, with the access to the property taken from the side gable with a footpath up the side there. You can see a set of stairs there and an entrance porch, and that those take you to the upstairs property, which you'll be able to see in the photos in a second. Next slide. Again, a bit of context here from the local development plan, which shows the settlement boundary is the black line. Green areas are open space. The white areas are residential. And again, just at the top of the slide there, you can see what would be the bottom boundary of the town centre area. The blue line is the conservation area. Again, that's not particularly relevant. It's just there. But you can see the distance from the town centre and the very much residential area of what's round about. Next slide, please. So some photographs here. Appeal property. There are 4 flats in the block, so 2 upstairs, 2 downstairs, and each have their own individual access. It's outlined there in yellow, as you can see. Next slide. And then this is the front of the property from a couple of angles. The door there is to the upstairs property. Next slide, please. This is the rear of to the left there is the rear of the application site. So you can see the ground floor windows there and all the other ones. And the right hand side image is the property just to the side of it. Next slide. This is the entrance to both the side doors of the application site, which is the left hand little porch area, and the neighbours on the other side, and then you can see the entrance door there, a separate entrance to the property. Next slide. And then this is looking back away from the end of the cul-de-sac towards the other properties towards the west. So property, ground floor, 2-bedroom flat located within a residential area. 4 flats in the block, each with their own front door. It has its own direct access to the street and a parking space. The property has been used as a short-term let since 2019. This particular development was approved in 2006. There's about 18 houses and 8 flats. The arrangement of the buildings in the cul-de-sac is really a very quiet, private, enclosed development. The application was refused on the 12th of December 2023 after the councils approved their non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets. And as you know, that guidance acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impact the loss of that residential property has on the availability of affordable housing for local people and impact on residential amenity, especially where the property is within a predominantly residential area, and there could be adverse impacts on amenity for existing residents, particularly in blocks with shared or communal entry. It also states proposals must comply with all relevant LDP2 policies, in particular Policy 1 placemaking. Reasons for refusal. Firstly, proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30 Tourism E of MPF4, as the proposal will result in, firstly, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and 2, the loss of residential accommodation, where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And second reason, the proposal is contrary to MPF4 Policy 14C, Design Quality and Place, and Perth and Kinross LDP2, Policies 1A and 1B Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the short-term let accommodation would adversely impact on the amenity of residents of the flats, and the short-term let use is not compatible with the amenity and character of the existing residential development. So the assessment by the Planning Service states that the proposed SDL would not be significantly different from a flat in terms of physical appearance, the extent of guest footfall or noise, so long as good management is in place. However, the expected high turnover of guests has the potential to increase disturbance to neighbouring residents, and this would contribute to a cumulative adverse impact on the residential character of the area. The proposal would result in the loss of a flat to short-term let use in the PH16 postcode area, which is already subject to a proliferation of holiday accommodation. This would in turn adversely impact the availability of residential accommodation locally. There are economic benefits, not least to the applicant themselves and to local business, who benefit from the custom of guests, but this does not outweigh the loss of residential accommodation in this case. There's 1 parking space for this property, and it would not be inconceivable for more than 1 car to be used by guests. So in terms of the applicant's case, the information that was submitted with the application included the flat is a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, main door access with parking for 1 car and space for visitors to park. As the flat is on the ground floor, it is accessible, and this means many bookings are from elderly and disabled visitors. They operate with a number of stipulations, including visitors being over 21, no young children, no pets, no parties, a quiet policy between 9 PM and 7 AM, a maximum of 4 guests staying and being shut over Christmas and New Year. The property is maintained by caretakers who live nearby and is decorated, furnished and cleaned to a high standard. And then since the appeal has been submitted, a number of additional points raised by the applicant, including the SDL has operated for 5 years without any issues, and the LRB has granted another approval on this basis. It has therefore also not been available as private residential accommodation already. In the PH16 postcode area, there are 4,000 properties and only 172 of these are registered as STLs. The sales market in Pitlochry is driven by second home buyers and older buyers, and the value of these properties alongside market factors means that even if the property is placed on the open market, it is unlikely to be purchased by someone deemed to have a housing need, such as a first-time buyer or those seeking affordable housing. The refusal of permission does not meet the terms of the LDP or the Council's housing strategy. Visitors spend their money locally, so it does contribute to the economy. They've submitted an affidavit which speaks to the property not being allowed to be used as a party flat, and there is a curfew in place. As accessible or disabled friendly accommodation, as the applicant describes it, the property is only one of 7 properties able to offer this. They suggest that refusal may give rise to a breach of the public sector equality duty placed on the local authority in terms of the Equality Act 2010, and refusal may also give rise to challenge in terms of human rights, the Human Rights Act 1998. They assert that the objector's comments are vexatious and, if tested, would not be capable of being substantiated. They highlight other STL proposals which at the time of submission had yet to be decided. And again, I would highlight those 3 of those appeals were upheld and were done so on the basis of the location of the property being in a more central mixed-use area and due to proximity to other non-residential uses. And the 2 which were dismissed were in flatted developments in residential areas. They go on to say that the property is located in a predominantly residential area and there's no impact on amenity for existing residents. The proposal does not relate to a residential property with 4 or more bedrooms. The applicant has detailed in their affidavit the criteria applicable to guests booking the property to ensure minimal disturbance to neighbours. It confirms that no police attendance has been required, and they draw further attention to the fact that despite the vast number of neighbour notifications that were carried out, that no adverse comments have been received. The proposal is not for refurbishment of a long-term empty property. It is their position that there will be no impact on local amenity or character of the area by the proposal. It seeks to formalise the existing reality of how the property is being used, and no construction work is envisaged. The proposal is not part of a diversification scheme. However, the granting of permission will ensure that visitors, particularly those with a disability, will be able to contribute to the local economy, including spending time and money at local diversification projects. It would encourage rural economic activity whilst safeguarding the service function of small towns such as Pitlochry, in keeping with NPF 4 Policy 29. There is no loss of accommodation, the property not being previously occupied as a residential dwelling. If not granted, it is the applicant's position that the property will not be placed on the market for sale or offered for long-term rent. If granted, it will continue to provide disabled-friendly accommodation to tourists and visitors to the area who contribute to the local economy. And in terms of other matters with this one, there is one objection who has expressed concerns about noise, parking, damage to cars, and there being no consultation. There's no objections from Environmental Health. And Communities Housing Strategy advised that the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets is above the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of STLs where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood.
Thank you very much. We'll open the questions. Councillor Ainsworth.
Thank you, Committee. I've got no questions.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
Just looking for some clarification. I think you said there was 1 parking space and a visitor parking space. Roughly where is the visitor parking space? Is it outside the house or?
So councillor, you can maybe just see there on the right-hand photograph, the right-hand side of it, there's like a grassed area. So there's a row of parking spaces. Sorry, I don't have an actual photograph of it, but there's maybe space for 4 or 5 cars, I would say, to park off the street opposite the property.
Just going back to the photograph on the left, is that the parking area in front, or is that just a pebbled area? Is that actually where they park the cars, but by the frontage?
Yes, it's
Right, okay,
It's right outside Convener.
okay, fine, thank you. Right, members, do we feel then that we can proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Illingworth
Happy to proceed.
and Councillor Cuthbert.
I'm happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Illingworth, if you'd like to start us off on this one.
I would like to approve the application. I'm not persuaded by the argument that there is a significant loss of residential amenity and there will be economic benefits to the whole of Pitlochry. And also there's the opportunity for the property to be used for medium-term lets, such as a month for specialist staff.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. I take the opposite view, I'm afraid. This is a flatted property. It's in a residential area. It's out with the town centre. My view is that this will, in all probability, lead to a loss of amenity. So I'm refusing the application.
Thank you, Councillor. And I too am going to concur with you on this one. The residential amenity is paramount on all of these. And we're in a similar situation to the previous case, and as much that we have a residential area, designated a residential area, and a short-term let would introduce a commercial element to that, to what has been decreed residential and the spirit of it being built as residential. And as before, there was a comparison put in place in Atoll Road, which again, of course, is not really relevant because it's on the main thoroughfare, and therefore the expectation of residential amenity there is much less. And also, obviously, we have to take into account, as I mentioned before, an appeal, which the items in that which are relevant to this, and as much that our LDP itself requires tourism proposals to be compatible with the amenity and character of the residential area. I note there's been no recorded events of antisocial behaviour, but it clearly says on that appeal, impacts on amenity and character are not limited to recorded instances of antisocial behaviour, and the movement and intensification of change through people coming through, it can inevitably have an effect on residential amenity. I do note, again, there's a comment regarding the access for disabled people, but again, I don't believe that overcomes the concerns over residential amenity, and therefore I'm in a position where I'm going to have to refuse the appeal. Mr. Elliott, we have a 2-to-1 again.
Yes, just to pick up on things that you just said, convener, just for clarification, is you said there was no reports of antisocial behaviour. That was true of the other decision. Here you have a dispute because you've got one representation,
Yes.
but I think you're
It's
really,
confusing,
you're
yeah,
looking,
yeah.
you're not taking that into
No,
account as I
no,
understand it.
no. And
You're
again,
looking at the kind of general structure.
it's a general structure, and I think
residential.
there's a
Yeah.
dispute over that one anyway, so I think we can ignore that particularly.
Right then, yes, take you, that was a 2-1 majority to
Majority.
refuse, and they take you on to page 419, which is the original grounds of refusal. I'm going to take a guess that it's the same change as previously, but it's policy 1A only. You take it.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to item 4.3, which is the change of use of a flat to form a short-term let accommodation in retrospect at 8 Cathedral Street in Dunkeld. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce.
Thank you, convener. So again, we'll just go through some slides. to show the location of the property. So main centre of Dunkeld here on the Google map, the site highlighted with the star. And you can see the location of it just in between the main thoroughfare and the cathedral, further to the west as well. And then the river just along the bottom of the image there. Next slide. And then just looking in a bit more detail, you can see the cathedral on the bottom left-hand corner of the image, and then the market square on the right-hand side, and the appeal property in the centre there. Next slide. And then just on the plan that was submitted with the application, so the red line outlines the boundary of the application site, so that includes the property itself, which is the ground floor flat in the block, and the access to the shared garden area to the rear, which is the south side of the property. Next slide. And then just zooming in a bit more detail, so you can see the outline of the floor plan of the property and the garden to the rear. Next slide. And then this is the floor plan of the property. So there is actually there's 2 access points into the property. They're not communal, they're separate. So there's one onto the main street at the front, and there's one to the rear as well. 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, bathroom. Next slide. So again, just to give a bit of context in terms of location of the property, which is the yellow star on the right there. Settlement boundary is the thick black line that you can see. Conservation area again with the dotted blue line. It is white behind that yellow star. So to the right hand side, you'll see the yellow area is the town and neighbourhood centre. And then to the left hand side, you have obviously with the cathedral important landscape designation there, with the site pretty much sandwiched between the 2 closest to the town centre boundary. Next slide, please. And then this is as you look up Cathedral Street towards the appeal property, which is highlighted with the arrow there, and then we'll come in a bit closer. So we're moving up towards the cathedral now, and the arrow shows you where the property is on the left-hand side. Next slide. And then looking directly at the front of the property, so you'll see the access door off Cathedral Street, the windows, and then the water wind to the left-hand side there between the 2 properties that takes you on a walk down to the river. Next slide. And then this is looking at it from the cathedral side, looking down towards the town centre. Next slide. And then again from the other side, looking a bit closer towards the town centre. Next slide. Again, this is the pedestrian walkway that takes you down to the back of the property, the garden area, and then also as a public walk down towards the river. Next slide. And again, this is as you go down towards the river with the appeal site on the right hand side behind the wall. Next slide. And then this is from the river looking back up towards the property. And again, as you head back up towards Cathedral Street, you can see the property there on the bottom. Next slide. And coming in closer there, the communal garden area behind the wall there. You'll see a set of steps there. That's the access that takes you separately into the flat upstairs. And then you'll see the 2 doors to the 2 properties at the back there. Separate accesses to ground floor and first floor flats. So yes, the site, a 2-bedroom residential flat, which is part of a 2-storey 5-window block, probably dating back to the early 1700s. The building is Category B listed and within Dunkeld Conservation Area. The flat is located at ground floor level, accessed from the street by its own door, and also to the rear from the garden, which is also where the separate external access to the flat upstairs is. The application was refused on the 14th of December 2023, after the council approved the non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets. This guidance acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impact the loss of that residential property has on the availability of affordable housing for local people and impact on residential amenity, especially where the property is within a predominantly residential area, and there could be adverse impacts on amenity for existing residents, particularly in blocks with shared and communal entry. It also states proposals must comply with all relevant LDP2 policies, in particular Policy 1 placemaking, which states that development must contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding environment. So the reasons for refusal in this case: firstly, the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30, Tourism E of MPF 4, as the proposal will result in an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And secondly, the proposal is contrary to MPF 4, Policy 14C, Design Quality in Place, and Perth and Kinross LDP 2, Policies 1A and 1B placemaking, and Policy 17D, residential areas, as the short-term let accommodation would adversely impact on the amenity of neighbouring residents, and the short-term let use would not be compatible with the amenity and character of the surrounding predominantly residential area. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the proposed STL use would not be significantly different from a flat in terms of physical appearance, the extent of guest footfall or noise, so long as good management is in place. However, the expected high turnover of guests has the potential to increase disturbance to neighbouring residents, and this would contribute to a cumulative adverse impact on the residential character of the area. The proposal would result in the loss of a flat to short-term let use in the PH16 postcode area, which is already subject to a proliferation of holiday accommodation. This would in turn adversely impact the availability of residential accommodation locally. There are economic benefits, not least to the applicant themselves and to local businesses who benefit from the custom of guests, but this does not outweigh the loss of residential accommodation in this case. The flat is on the ground floor with another flat at first floor level. The rear of the site is accessible to both properties, with the upper floor being accessed from this rear garden area. Through the use of the flat as an STL, there is the potential for noise and disturbance. The street is narrow and properties are in close proximity to each other. Whilst it is close to the town centre, it is not in this designated area, and the surroundings of the site are residential in nature. The formalisation of the STL could lead to an intensification of use and movements, which would adversely impact the amenity of neighbouring residents and the surrounding area. There is no dedicated car parking space for the property. Although there is on-street parking, it appears to be generally oversubscribed. However, it is noted that Dunkeld benefits from good public transport links by bus and train, and that visitors could travel by other modes to the private car. The proposed formalisation of the use could lead to an intensification of movements from various people and groups, which would adversely impact the amenity of neighbouring residents and would detract from the primarily residential character of this part of Cathedral Street. It would also result in the loss of residential accommodation, and it is considered to be detrimental to housing availability in this area, subject to housing pressure, and the limited economic benefits associated with the proposals would not outweigh this loss. So in terms of the case by the applicant, they point out that the property has been in their family for generations, and whilst the applicant was born and brought up in Dunkeld, they do have to live and work remotely with their current employment. The property has been a short-term let for 3 years and does not lend itself to large groups due to its size and has a maximum occupancy of 4 people. It's not envisaged that there will be any antisocial behaviour. There is no parking, but visitors can use public transport. The demand is high in the Dunkeld area for this size and type of property let, and the applicant is keen to keep the lets at a reasonable rate as they recognise that locally accommodation prices are high and potentially unattainable for visitors. It is anticipated that visitors will support local businesses, hotels, cafes, etc., thus contributing to the local economy. And then in terms of the additional information in support of the appeal, they have included occupancy figures, a letter of support from local businesses and residences, and a mortgage provider extract. So the house has been used as a short-term let since 2016 in conjunction with use by the owner for their own purposes when required. It has been in full-time holiday let use since 2021. If the appeal is rejected, the flat will end up only being occupied while the owner is out of the country. It is noted that the flat is located in a busy area of Dunkeld, which relies on the tourism industry to ensure the long-term viability of the village and local businesses. The concerns about impact on local amenity are unfounded and unsubstantiated. This is because Cathedral Street is one of the busiest streets in Dunkeld, as it is the main access to the cathedral, including use for weddings, funerals and other events 7 days a week. The street is home to a number of businesses. The pend beside the property is a local walking route to and along the river. As the property will not be rented out long term and it won't be sold, the property is not offering any loss to the local residential accommodation stock, and it will sit empty for long periods of time, which has a detrimental impact on the village and businesses. If it hypothetically came up for sale, it would not be affordable in any case, based on the valuation of such properties in Dunkeld. Visitors use local businesses, providing economic benefit, and local people are employed supporting the STL, including cleaners, laundry, gardener, window cleaning, and local trades. So in terms of other matters, there have been no objections. Environmental health don't appear to have been consulted in this case, but they would likely refer in the usual terms to the licensing conditions. And Communities Housing Strategy advised that the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets is above the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of STLs where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Cuthbert.
I've no question.
Councillor Illingworth.
I have no questions.
And I've got no questions either on this one. Members, then, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained in the papers and presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
I'm happy to proceed. So Councillor Cuthbert, you'd like to start us on this one?
Thank you, convener. I think this is an interesting one. It is a residential area, but it's not a quiet residential area. The Cathedral Street, I know Dunkeld quite well, and Cathedral Street's a very busy street, and it is literally just next to other town centre, things like pubs and shops and so on. It has its own door, and in principle, I'm in favour of upholding the appeal and granting consent for this application.
Thank you, Councillor. I agree with you on the residential amenity. In this case, the expectation is lower because of the usage of the street up and to and from the cathedral. It has its separate entrance, as you said, in this case on the front, and although there is some parking, there is no allocated parking to it. And the road it looks quite narrow when there's two sets of cars parking there. Given that side of it, I think on this occasion I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to grant the appeal. I think it's suitable. I think, as I say, the expectation of residential amenity here is much lower because of the movement of pedestrian traffic and to some extent cars. So yes, I was happy to grant the appeal as well with you, Councillor Illingworth.
I'm happy to grant the appeal with the same reasoning as my colleagues, Councillor Cuthbert and Councillor Braun.
So, Ms. Reddick, we have a unanimous decision in this case to grant the appeal.
Yes, that would be subject to suitable terms, conditions and formalities as usual. Okay, anything else to add, I think? No. Okay.
So we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is number 4.4, and this is part change of use, alterations and extension to dwelling house to form a short-term let accommodation for Lord Muirden, I hope that's how I pronounce it, Methven in Perth. Mrs. Tierney, if you would introduce.
Thank you, convener. Just run through some images here. So location of the site, you'll see Methven there, just to the north side of Methven, a small row of properties just to the north there. Next slide. And then as you zoom in on the row of properties, this is the southernmost on the end of the row. Next slide. And then this just highlights the extent of the ownership within the property. You will see the house just in the top there, and quite a lot of garden area running down to the Medvin Burn. Next slide. And then this is the application site boundary. So the red line denotes the application site, and you'll see the dwelling house just in the top of that area there. Next slide. And then this is, as you zoom in on the proposal, the existing house is the area in white, and the alterations to the property are within that kind of grey shaded area, both in terms of the extension and the parking area for the property. Next slide. This is the internal floor plan of the existing property. This is really relevant with regard to the alterations to the property, although it's an alteration and an extension to the house, and that accommodation would be for the applicant. There would be internal alterations to the existing house to provide the area for the short-term letting, which we'll see in the next slide. So you can probably just make out on the left-hand side there, the kind of purple hatched areas on the top side within the existing house. That would become the short-term let area. And then the extension to the other side of the cottage, which is the area outlined in green, and in the grey there, that's the extension to the house for the applicant's own private accommodation. Next slide. So these are some elevations of the property. Maybe should have shown you the photographs first, but anyway, we'll go through these and we'll come back to them if it helps. This is the west elevation, so the road is on the other side of the property here. You'll see a single-storey cottage there with a small gable, and the addition of the two-storey extension to the front there. And then from the south elevation, again, single-storey cottage with a side extension, and then the two-storey extension onto the side of the existing cottage. Next slide. And then this is the east elevation. So this is as you would view the property from the road. So you would be able to see the roof. So the top image there on the right-hand side, that's the roof of the two-storey extension behind. And then that would be the courtyard image. The bottom right image there is the courtyard. Next slide. And then this is from the north elevation. So this would be the view from the neighbouring property to the north. So you can see the single-storey cottage and the two-storey extension on the side. So then these are some photographs. So this is looking from the junction to Medvin, looking towards the application site, which you really can't see, but it is behind the trees and hedging, just right in the middle there. This is the ground to the front of the property in the ownership of the applicant, kind of laid to lawn, looking towards the road and then towards the west. Next slide. Then this is the front of the property. This is what you would, this is the elevation that faces the road, which is the most visible elevation of the property, albeit there's a lot of planting and trees and hedges to the front there. And then this is looking back towards the road, so you can see the existing single-storey cottage. The small green cabin to the front there, that would be removed to make way for the two-storey extension onto that gable. Next slide. And then this is the courtyard on the left-hand side. So the two-storey extension would go onto that gable, just behind where that car is parked. And then again, the right-hand side, the extension would come out onto the edge of that gable, basically obscuring where that car is parked. And that's the mutual boundary with the property to the north side. So you can see the gable end of that house there. Next slide. left-hand image, again, that the hut area on the left-hand side, that would be removed to make way for the extension. And on the right-hand side, that's the area that would become part of the short-term letted area, part of the property with that small patio. Next slide. So this is from the south side of the property, from the laid out lawn areas to the front. So there is a bit of a drop in level down to those areas up to where the cottage is located. And you can see, well, particularly on the right hand side there, the green cabin that would be removed to make way for the two-storey extension. And you can see the neighbouring dwelling house to the north, just to the left there as well. And then this is just some more images of the site and the neighbouring property in terms of just some of the heights of the existing house and the neighbouring property. And then we've got some images of other dwelling houses in the row of houses that exist here, mainly because these have been drawn to our attention by the applicant in their submissions. So the left-hand side image is between the application site and the neighbouring house. The neighbouring house is on the right-hand side there now. And then some images of other properties along the road. So varied selection of ages of properties, more modern properties, older properties, single stories, separate garages, 2 stories, 1.5 stories. And then this particular property, there was one other that the applicant included, but I don't know if you can just make it out. It is a single story property with a 2-story extension on the side. If I was to hazard a guess, I would say that was possibly done. The original house was possibly 60s, 70s, and the extension was maybe done in the 80s, perhaps. Next slide. Okay. So yes, the proposal is to extend an existing cottage to provide additional accommodation for the private dwelling house and incorporate some internal alterations to split part of the house off to allow it to be used for short-term holiday letting. The existing house is a single-storey cottage located at the southern end of a row of houses just to the north of Medvin. The extension is proposed as 2 stories on the western end of the existing cottage. Reasons for refusal. Firstly, the design and appearance of the extension would introduce an incongruous feature into the surrounding area, which would not respect either the character or appearance of the existing cottage or the surrounding area. The proposal is therefore contrary to both the adopted Perth and Kinross LDP 2 policies 1A and 1B placemaking and the Council's statutory supplementary guidance on placemaking, as the resultant extended building would not respect the existing building and would adversely impact on the character and visual amenity of the surrounding area by introducing a visually incongruous extension. Secondly, the design and appearance of the extension would introduce an incongruous feature into the surrounding area, which would not respect either the character or appearance of the existing cottage or the surrounding area. The proposal is therefore contrary to the overarching principles of Policy 14, Design Quality and Place of MPF 4, which promotes good design for all new developments, as the resultant extended building would not respect the existing building and would adversely impact on the character and visual amenity of the surrounding area by introducing a visually incongruous extension. So in terms of the assessment by the planning service, while the principle of development is acceptable, both in terms of extending the property and the use of part of it for short-term letting, the main issue is the design of the alterations and extension proposed. The 2-story height of the extension against the single-story cottage is considered to introduce an incongruous element into the street scene, and while there are larger dwellings in the area, including one single-storey house with a 2-storey extension, what is proposed is visually detrimental. There are no amenity issues as the applicant will be living next door to the STL use, which will also be in their ownership. The applicant's case, they've stated that the house sits on 3/4 of an acre in a row of 10 houses, and the extension will run in line with the neighbour's building line and in line with the height of their roofs, and it will be below the height of the house roof height of the neighbouring property. There are 2 other examples of 2-storey extensions onto smaller properties close to the site. All the houses along the road are very different in character, and there would be no detrimental impact on the surrounding area. In terms of other matters, there's no objections from third parties or statutory consultees. And housing strategy comment that the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets for PH1 is 0.8% and below the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Illingworth. Any questions?
I have no questions.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Just the one question. I have to say that the plans made me a little bit dizzy because they seem to keep changing orientation. The report of handling says that in relation to the impact on the neighbouring property, it is noted that there is a balcony feature proposed on the rear elevation, which would result in some overlooking to the neighbour to the north. But the window appears to be facing south. So I was just wondering, will there be an impact from that window overlooking?
Yes, councillor, I think you're correct. Audrey, if we can maybe go back to the image with the elevations on it. I had noticed that myself, I think. Next one. Yeah, so that's the south elevation, that's facing away from the neighbour. So I think that balcony and the upper floor window is facing away from the neighbour, because if you go to the next elevation, which would be the north, not this one, the next one again, there's no windows on that elevation.
I have no questions myself on this one. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed on this one. I'll start us off for this case. This is an interesting one to look at, I think. There's been no objections from neighbours, and we've seen from the photographs that the extension will be relatively hidden. I have a slight concern about the way it's been put together, and it's on a two-floor basis against a single-storey traditional building. I know the existing part is to be turned into a short-term let, and the new extension will become the owner's residence. And I get a feeling that we're building a house against another house rather than an extension on this one. There seems to be a considerable amount of ground from what the photograph says. I have a feeling that, again, what the planner has, in principle, the extension is not a problem. But I'm of opinion that perhaps it should be a single-storey extension, and there is sufficient ground within the curtilage of the owner to do that. So on balance, I think on this one, I'm going to refuse the appeal. But as I say, I think a single-storey extension, even a sizable one, would be more applicable given the traditional build. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to approve the application. I think the second story will not have a significant impact on the layout of that particular settlement, on the basis that there are at least two other houses with the same sort of setup. So I'm happy to approve.
Councillor Cuthbert, you have deciding factor on this one.
Keep getting the decision. It's good. Yes, I side with Councillor Illingworth on this one. In principle, I think the visibility of this site is you'd have to stop outside and get out your car and have a look to see it. So I don't think it's going to have a big impact. I think that it's what they want to do. It's their house, it's their land. So, and I can't see a reason to turn it down. So I'm in favour of upholding the appeal.
Thank you, gentlemen. So, Mr. Elliott, we now have a 2-to-1 majority with myself in the minority this time around. Makes a change. I'll leave you to comment, my dear colleagues.
Yes, I agree. I think you've got a majority to approve. Obviously, Convener, you were looking to refuse. And I think just to clarify, as best as I heard, I think those that are looking to approve considered a low less impact. It was basically in according with policy. You didn't think this was an acceptance policy. You basically felt it was acceptable. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
I'd like to put in a condition that they shouldn't be sold separately, so that they should be one property.
I don't know if Mrs. Tierney has any comments on conditions, and certainly that was referred to in the report of handling.
Yeah, that's
Fine, then we'll now move on to the next application. This is number 4.5 on our agenda. This is alterations and another extension to a dwelling house at Cairn Cottage, Kinocti in Cooperangus. Mrs. Tierney, if you would introduce for us.
Thank you, convener. Just run through some slides again. So location of the application site there with the yellow star, very much rural. Springfield, Salter to the south, Campmere, Burrelton to the north. Next slide. And then just a bit of a closer view of the proximity of the site to Burrelton in particular to the west. Next slide. And then just a bit closer and again, so along the main road there are a number of properties. You come off the road through some farm buildings and up a track to the 3 houses that exist, including the appeal site. Next slide. So you can see the 3 houses here, the appeal site highlighted with the yellow there. Next slide. And then these are the plans that came with the application. So the red line denoting the boundary of the site, neighbouring house to the left, application site to the right, and on the left-hand image is the house as exists, and on the right-hand side the house as exists with the extension shown to the front. Next slide. And then this is the floor plan of the existing cottage on the left again, and then with the proposed floor plan on the right. So you can see a small link attaching to the roof of the existing cottage, and then the extension to the front there. And in terms of the existing floor plan, you can see there's like a small lean-to extension on the side. The main gable of the cottage is the thicker line, and then the extension to the front, which overlaps with the lean-to. Next slide. And these are the elevations. So on the left, again, existing front elevation of the cottage, and on the right, the proposed with the extension to the front, and then southwest elevation, end gable of the property, with the extension shown in the right-hand side, and then the other gable elevation looking towards the northeast, and then with the extension to the front. Next slide. So these are some photographs of the existing properties, a couple of newer style properties. The cottage is just behind the tree there and the hedge on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. And then this is the front elevation of the existing cottage, garden area and hedging, and then the neighbouring house to the left. And then just a closer image of the front of the property, as I say, with the lean-to extension on the side gable. Next slide. And then this is the access round to the back of the property, again with that lean-to extension on the side gable. Next slide. And then this is looking back towards the access in with the neighbouring property. And then that's the rear of the existing cottage. Next slide. Thank you. So yes, property is a single-storey house forming part of a small group of housing in the rural area southeast of Burrelton. The proposal is for a single-storey extension on the front elevation to provide an accessible bedroom and level access to a patio area. The patio, fencing and gates are permitted development and are not part of the consideration of the application. The extension will be to the left-hand side of the house, and while there's a small lean-to extension on the gable end, the extension will project forward of the end of the gable. The extension will therefore be visually prominent when approaching the house. Reasons for refusal: the proposed extension, by virtue of its siting, scale, design and materials, would have a detrimental impact on the character of the dwelling house, and approval would be contrary to policy 16 G1 quality homes of MPF 4. Number 2, the proposed extension, by virtue of its design and siting, would not respect the traditional character of the existing dwelling house and would not contribute positively to the quality of the built environment. Approval would therefore be contrary to policy 1A, placemaking of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2. Number 3, the proposed extension, by virtue of its appearance, scale, materials, finishes and colours, would not complement its surroundings, namely the modest traditional dwelling house. Approval would therefore be contrary to policy 1BC, placemaking of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. And 4, the proposed extension, by virtue of its siting, scale, design and materials, would dominate the principal elevation of the modest dwelling house and would not be a harmonious addition to it, and approval would therefore be contrary to the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Supplementary Guidance 2020. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the extension will be to the left-hand side of the house, and while there is a small lean-to extension on the gable end, the extension will project forward of the end of the gable. The extension will therefore be visually prominent when approaching the house. The scale and location of the extension, formed also with a small linked roof at right angles to the cottage, forming an L-shaped design, would be detrimental to the traditional character of the house. There is no direct impact on the amenity of the neighbouring property. MPF 4 Policy 16H, Quality Homes, supports householder development that provides adaptations relating to people with health conditions that lead to particular accommodation needs. Where it complies, it must also comply with other policies in terms of layout, design and visual amenity. Unfortunately, in this case, the proposed design outweighs the applicant's requirements. While not a reason for refusal, the existing hedge to the front of the property would need to be removed to accommodate the extension, and this is detrimental to biodiversity. So in terms of the applicant's case, they've explained that the extension is required to provide them with more internal space as a result of her health condition, which is a rare genetic condition causing joint pain and requires her to use a power chair. The bigger bedroom area has been identified as the main area where they need to improve the house. It is noted that to extend at the back would cost more due to the internal configuration of the house, but no specific details are given about this. In terms of other matters, there's no objections from third parties or statutory consultees. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open up to some questions. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. A couple of questions. Would you describe the building as having potential for being listed?
Thank you, Councillor. I would say not. It's obviously an older property. It's got some traditional proportions and so on in terms of its size and the roof shape and style and the slate on the roof, for example. But there's no features that you would describe as being of architectural or historic interest that would be worthy of listing, no.
Second question, is it the case that normally extensions to the front of a house are generally refused, but not always?
The council's guidance does advise against extensions to the front of properties. That's not to say that there can't be instances where those could be approved. It would very much depend on the site and the circumstances and other material considerations. But the view of the planning service is clearly that because it's on the front of the property, the consistent approach would be to refuse. But there are other considerations.
Thank you.
Just have one question myself. We heard that the existing hedgerow have to be removed for the extension to be put in place. I presume we could condition from a landscape to be put back in to try and hide it as best as possible. Is that possible?
Yes, convener. I think the concerns of the planning service there are related to biodiversity rather than any visual requirement. So absolutely, if you feel you would like to condition that, indeed it is a requirement of NPF4 now to think about biodiversity enhancement.
Councillor Cuthbert, questions?
Yeah, so on the question of the hedge, is it a material consideration that we should refuse because they've got to remove a hedge?
I would suggest not, councillor. They could remove that hedge without planning permission, but it's obviously part of the proposals that it would be removed. So it is a consideration for you to think about whether that's acceptable or not. It's not in the reasons for refusal. It's simply been highlighted by planning that is a consideration.
So members, are we feel that we can proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Illingworth?
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Cuthbert?
Happy to proceed.
I'm too happy to proceed. So Councillor Illingworth, could you start on this one for us?
I'd like to approve this application. While I do understand the reasoning behind the general policy against extensions of the front of the house, I think in this particular case, where it's a very remote location and the property is not likely to be listed or have any architectural significance, I think in this case we can allow the application to go ahead.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert?
I appear to be agreeing with Councillor Illingworth again, which is something I rarely do, of course. Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that we have a policy that says that front extensions should be avoided. However, this is extremely remote. It's not easy to get to. I think it also, by building the extension onto the front of the house, they're taking advantage of the light, which is from the south. If they were to extend out the back, that would be north facing, and the purpose of this room is to provide light to the bedroom. I think also you get the vistas from the front, so I'm basically in favour of approving this application.
Thank you both. I think we're going to have a unanimous decision here on this one. Unusually today. Again, I agree with you. It's a very remote property. None of the neighbours have had any objections to the build. I appreciate we don't normally allow extensions on the beginning at the front of the property, but there are always going to be exceptions. And obviously, although we can't take into account the medical conditions involved, nonetheless it's in the back of your mind, and there's a reason why it's been built on the front, as you said, for the southern aspect. So taking those all into account, irrespective of the standard policy, I think in this occasion we can decide to go ahead, and therefore I'm happy to grant the appeal as well. So Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, approve unanimously. Now, the way I've heard it is that although contrary to policy, you've given your reasons as to why it is acceptable, and of course it would be subject to suitable terms, conditions and informatives. This is telling me of comments, but whether you're looking for a landscaping condition is what came up in discussion.
If my colleagues are in agreement, yes, some form of landscaping to try and bring the biodiversity back, and also trying to shield the extension if possible.
There may be a separate biodiversity
Yes,
condition
yes,
itself. You know, you're used to the brickbats and the brick boxes, etc.
And can we have a condition for a slated roof? Is that?
Yes, I mean, I think it would be maybe that samples will be provided or further details, but the plans do show slate on the roof. So I think it would just be confirming that through condition.
Councillor Cuthbert, you're in agreement to that?
Yes.
Yeah, we're all in agreement on that one then. So members, we'll now move on to the next set of applications. These are all short-term let applications which were referred back to planning officers for comment following the introduction of the non-statutory guidance, and then would allow time for the applicants to have their comment as well. And the three of them are now coming back to us. So and I think on these occasions I might be the only one who was on the three of them. But anyway, we'll start with number 5.1, which was again a change of use of flat to form short-term let accommodation at 4 Monarch Road in Perth. And Mrs. Tierney, if you can just give us a general overview.
Thank you, convener. I'll just run through the slides in the first instance. So the application site is right in the middle of this image here. So you can see a retail park on the left-hand side there, roads and so on, town centre towards the right-hand side. Very much the section in the middle there, the residential area, 200 plus so flats in that area at Monarch Road. Next slide. And then this is as you zoom in, you go past a number of flats as you come into the development, and you continue round to more flats. And then the building in question is the circular building there just in the top where the star is. Next slide. This is the plan that was submitted with the application. So in this case, it's the kind of quarter on the ground floor there at the back of the property, and the red line includes the access in and the parking area some distance away to the side. Next slide. And then this is as you zoom in on the property. Again, the red line denotes the boundary, the outline of the flat. Next slide. So again, this is an extract from the local development plan settlement statement. So you can see city centre areas are the areas marked in the kind of brown colour, opportunity areas in green. The conservation area boundary is the dotted blue line. Kind of commercial centre is the yellow area. Everything else there that's white is effectively residential in character, and the site is where that red star is. Next slide. So this is the building where the flat is located. So a number of floors there, 4 flats on each floor, and the parking and access road outside. Next slide. And then this is just another view of the building on the right hand side, showing the access into the development and car parking areas. Next slide. And again, those are the buildings on the right hand side there, are the ones you pass as you come into the development. That's the building on the left. Next slide. So this is the quarter, if you like, of the ground floor. That's the windows of the flat, and that's the Perth Lade on the left hand side, and walkway, and the communal garden areas outside. Next slide. And then this is looking from the other side of the Lade across to the development. Some of the windows there just on the angle of the property. Next slide. And again, this is the kind of communal garden area, the Lade to the right hand side, and the other blocks of flats to the rear. Next slide. Again, that's the other block to the rear, and the communal kind of garden area and bin storage area as well for the other block. Next slide. This is the access road as you continue round, which shows the parking area where the parking space for this flat is located. So you can't see the building from where the parking is. Next slide. This is the communal entrance door to the building. Next slide. A number of key safe boxes on the wall there indicating the likelihood of more than one STL in this building. Next slide. Communal entrance hall leading to a lift and stairs. Next slide. And then the entrance doors to the properties on the ground floor. Next slide. That's the actual parking space for this property number 4. Next slide. And then this is the communal bin area at the outside of the communal entrance to the building. So the application was deferred on the 18th of March to allow the Planning Authority to comment on the Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets, which is a material consideration. The applicant was then able to further comment on those. So the Planning Service have commented that the site is located within a predominantly residential area that is not defined within the local plan as being within either the city centre or town centre, and the proposal is located within a flatted block where there would be concerns over the impact on other existing residential flatted properties via shared entry and communal areas internally. If approved, the proposal would have an unacceptable impact on the local amenity and the residential character of the area, which is contrary to the non-statutory guidance and the relevant parts of the development plan. In response to that, the applicant has made several further observations that they had been told by Perth and Kinross Council that the guidance would have no bearing, that Monart Road is surrounded by mixed uses, that they've been operating as a short-term let for 5 years without problems, concerns about how short-term lets may be operating without permission and how this is being policed, and there's no consistency in how short-term lets are being considered.
Thank you. Well, I've got some questions. Just to clarify, looking at the map there, obviously it seems to be surrounded by commercial elements, but this is a slip of residential land in the middle of all this. Is that right?
Yes, convener. I think the photographs do demonstrate that there's more than 200 residential properties in this development. They're all flats, they're all communal access, parking. So although I think as the local plan map shows, it is kind of sandwiched between the commercial area and the city centre, it's very much a residential area.
And there have been some concerns raised by neighbours, I think.
Yeah, if I go back to some of the information that was presented originally, there were 9 letters of representation, 8 of which were objecting. Main issues raised, noise arising from the use of the property, parking, 1 letter of support.
Councillor Illingworth, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
How many parking spaces did you say there was? Is it just the one?
Just the one.
Oh, members, then back to my piece here. Are we then able to proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
Have to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. And I'll start this one as I was on the committee when we dealt with this. Once again, short-term let. Once again, residential amenity is the central point here. This is a designated residential area, and introducing short-term lets into it is introducing a commercial element into that area. And obviously that has an effect on neighbours. As we've seen here, there are several letters of objection written concerning problems within the site. There is a communal entrance in this instance, and inevitably the movement of people and luggage and cars has an intensification of adverse effect on the amenity of people living there, which is a concern. We've had other properties in Monart that we've dealt with and had to refuse, and I think and again in this instance, I think we're in a situation where I feel that I have to refuse the appeal. The concern is residential amenity, and I think that's paramount here, as it is with all of these cases. So to confirm, I'm refusing the appeal. Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah, I would like to refuse the appeal on the basis that if we grant it, there will be a reduction in residential amenity.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
It's the third time in a row. I agree with both of you on this one. I think given there's a communal entry, there's only one parking space, and it's very much an oasis of calm within a sort of an area of commercial activity. So yes, I think residential amenity would be affected. So
Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision on this one again. And I don't think there's any necessary changes to the reasons of refusal on the decision notice.
Yes, Convener, I had that unanimous refusal and I didn't hear anyone suggest any changes to the appointed officer's reasons for refusal.
Yep. So we'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 5.2. This is again the change of use of flat to form short-term let accommodation at 14 Monnet Road on this occasion. Mrs. Tierney, if you could give us an overview again.
Thank you, Convener. Just run through some images again of this one. So again, you see the location of the property at Monart Road. Within that larger flatted residential development. Next slide. And again, the circular building there where the first floor flat is located. Next slide. And in this case, first floor flat on the other side of the building with the access to the parking space across the road. Next slide. And then zooming in on that just so you can see the parking space, the access to the property, communal bin storage and the outline of the floor plan of the flat. And again, just for information and clarity, the location of the property insofar as the zoning areas in the local development plan, the white areas being the kind of largely residential in nature, brown, yellow, blue areas, opportunity sites, city centre, commercial. Next slide. So again, this is the building in question, containing a number of flats in the development. Next slide. And then looking at that building on the right-hand side as you enter the development. And then that's the access as you come into the development past a number of existing flats. And then as you continue through, there's several more of those. Next slide. And then in this case, it's a first floor flat within the building that you can see there around the windows of that property, overlooking the Lade. Next slide. And just looking from the other side, the windows of that property. Next slide. And then this is the Lade and the external communal garden areas. And then looking in the other direction towards some of the other flats in the development. Next slide. And again, those neighbouring flats there and the communal garden and bin area for those flats. And then this is the parking area where the parking space for this flat is located, which is around the corner from the building itself. This is the communal entrance to the building. And then again, you'll see the safe key deposit boxes indicating the likelihood of a few STLs in this particular building. And then again, the kind of communal internal areas and the doors to each of the flats. Next slide. And the parking space that goes with this property. And the communal waste area outside the building. So again, this application was deferred on the 18th of March to allow the Planning Authority to comment on the Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets, which is a material consideration. The applicant was then able to further comment on these. Planning Authority have further commented that the site is located within a predominantly residential area that is not defined within LDP2 as being within either the city centre or town centre, and the proposal is located within a flatted block where there would be concerns over the impact on other existing residential flatted properties via shared entry and communal areas internally. If approved, the proposal would have an unacceptable impact on the local amenity and the residential character of the area, which is contrary to the non-statutory guidance and the relevant parts of the development plan. In response, the applicant has made several further observations that they had been told by Perth and Kinross Council that the guidance would have no bearing, that Monart Road is surrounded by mixed uses, that they've been operating as a short-term let for 5 years without problems, concerns about how short-term lets may be operating without permission and how this is being policed, and that there's no consistency in how short-term lets are being considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll open up the questions. Councillor Illingworth
I have no question.
and Councillor Cuthbert.
I have no questions either.
And I have no questions on this one. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Illingworth
Happy to proceed.
and Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Illingworth, would you like to kick off on this one?
I'm afraid I'm going to move that we refuse this application on the grounds of reduced residential amenity.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I also will move to refuse this appeal. In principle, it's the same sort of rationale. It's a residential area. There's a communal entry, and there's only one parking space. And I think the amenity of the residents will be affected by making this into a short-term let.
Thank you both, and I'm going to concur with you on this one. Again, it's residential amenity is the core that we're looking at. The communal entrance, one parking space, a number of issues been raised by neighbours, which it causes a concern. The intensification, as we said before, of movement adversely affects the amenity of neighbouring residents, and I feel that is a concern here, a sufficient concern that we should refuse the appeal, and I'm going to concur with both of you. So again, Mr. Elliott, a unanimous decision.
Yes, thank you, convener. And again, I'm looking at page 703, 704, which was the original grounds of refusal. I'm assuming that you're in line with those, not looking for any change.
Good job. Thank you. So we'll now move on to the last item of the day, which is change of use of flat to form short let accommodation unit in retrospect, Upper South Flat, Annesley Cottage, Burnside, Aberfeldy. Mrs. Tierney, if you could give us an overview, please.
Thank you, convener. So this is the application site in the centre of Aberfeldy, to the north part of through the main part of the town. Application site shown there with the yellow star. Next slide. And then again, to give some context in terms of the local development plan, settlement plan, the application site shown with the star, the yellow area being the town and neighbourhood centre in Aberfeldy. The blue line's the conservation area, but it's more the location of the property is not within the central town and neighbourhood centre. It is more within the what you would call a residential area. Next slide. Then this is the application site plan, which shows the flat highlighted in red. Next slide. Gremlin. Okay, thanks. So this is the floor plan of the two-bedroom flat there, and the living area, small toilet and kitchenette. The access to this property, it's on the first floor, up a separate flight of stairs and a separate access door into the property with the driveway and parking to the side. Next slide. So this is the building. You see the flight of stairs on the outside to the upper floor. There's 4 properties in this block, and you can see the off-street parking to the side of the property. Next slide. And then just a closer look at the garden area to the rear there, the parking area, the steps up to the separate door into the flat, and the door to the downstairs flat as well. Next slide. And then just another image of the front of the property there with the windows to the front and the door up the stairs. Next slide. And then just a closer image of the driveway and parking area to the side of the property. Next slide. And then this is around the back of the property, showing the garden area. Next slide. And then this is looking back from the garden towards the road, past the front door to the downstairs property and the stairs to the upstairs flat and the parking area. Next slide. And this is as you look along the main road, so you can see the flat highlighted there in yellow, and the rest of the building pretty much the same configuration on the other side. I don't think all the flats are identical in terms of bedroom numbers or floor space, but you get the feel there. Next slide. And then this is looking from north towards the application site along the road. So there's also available on-street parking. Next slide. And then the property there just on the left, and then as you carry on, the road does narrow as it kind of goes around the corner there. Next slide. And then this is looking back in the opposite direction. So this application was deferred on 18th of March to allow the Planning Authority to comment on the Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets, which is a material consideration, and the applicant was then able to further comment on those. So the Planning Authority commented that the site is in a predominantly residential area, about 80 metres north of the town centre, and that the effect of the proposal on local amenity and the character of the area needs to be considered, in addition to the loss of residential accommodation and the local economic benefits which may accrue from the proposal. It is acknowledged that economic benefits can derive from short-term lets as business or leisure occupiers use a range of attractions and activities. The loss of this flat in Aberfeldy is not considered to have a significant impact on the availability of residential accommodation in the area, and therefore reference to NPR 4 Policy 30E2 in the first reason for refusal can be removed. Reference to Policy 1B placemaking can also be removed. However, the 2 reasons for refusal still remain, as by virtue of the location of the property in a predominantly residential area, this still conflicts with the component parts of NPF 4 Policy E1 and Policy 1C Design Quality in Place, and Policy 1A Placemaking and Policy 17D Residential Areas, as the STL adversely impacts on the amenity of neighbouring residents and is not compatible with the amenity and character of the predominantly residential surrounding area. The applicant has further responded, stating that 2 of the flats in the block are second homes, which lie empty a lot of the time, and the only resident lives on the ground floor beneath the property. Burnside is made up of a mixture of residential and commercial properties, including a builder's yard opposite, a joiner's workshop 70 metres away, a garage 100 metres away, and a funeral director 100 metres away. The STL has operated for 2.5 years without any noise complaints or disruption. The property has been significantly improved and is well maintained. The kitchenette is very small, so guests tend to eat out normally. It is unlikely that if the flat was rented or sold that a local person would be the occupier or owner. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
That last comment about not being a local person buying the place? Was that from the applicants or?
Yes, they're saying that if it's unlikely that if the flat was rented or sold, that a local person would be the occupier or owner.
Councillor Illingworth.
Two questions. First of all, when you say a local person, what is the definition of a local person?
Don't think there is a definition, councillor. Sorry.
And the second question is about the kitchenette. Would it have any room for a washing machine or washing facilities? For clothes?
Councillor, I don't believe it does. Obviously, there was quite a bit of detail gone through on the proposal at the last meeting before it was deferred. I'm just seeing if there's anything in particular. I don't think there is. If I find anything to the contrary, I'll let you know.
And just to add that the information is from the applicant that it doesn't contain that. Whether it could is another matter. I think the indication is no.
I'll just confirm that the kitchenette has no washing machine, no dishwasher, tumble dryer or freezer.
Happy, thank you.
Just a couple myself. Looking at the site from memory when I was there in your photographs, I would suspect you get 2 or 3 cars onto the parking space outside.
I would agree. I think you could get 2 in.
Yeah.
I would say maybe not 3, but more than 1 probably.
And just to clarify, I know you mentioned other businesses around. The map up there shows Aberfeldy Electrical, just south of it. You said there were other businesses around it. I seem to recall there were, but a woodworking shop, or you mentioned funeral directors, but
Convener, I think the thing about, well, often these maps are Google Maps and they contain all businesses. Those might even not be, that might just be their registered address. There might not be a business operating from there. So I think it's more the information that the appellant has, or the applicant has put in that, to kind of balance the argument against the fact that the planning authority are saying it's a residential area. They're saying, well, yes, it may be, but it's very close to the town centre and very nearby there are other businesses operating.
so what we're effectively saying is it is classed as residential, but there are commercial elements that open up in there in due course.
It's not within the town centre. It is within what you would call a residential area. But that doesn't mean that there may not be businesses operating nearby.
Okay, fine, thank you. No other further questions. So do we feel then that we can proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
I'm happy to proceed. So Councillor Cuthbert, if you could start off on this one.
Yes, thank you, convener. I'm minded to approve the appeal. My view is that whilst it's in a residential area, it's not a purpose-built residential area. It's developed over a long period of time, and there are other businesses in the area. It's been operating for 2.5 years. There's apparently been no issues raised during that period. I don't think residential amenity is going to be impacted in terms of there's 2 parking spaces. There appears to be some garden with the property. So in essence, I'm in favour of upholding the appeal.
For that, I think I'm going to concur with you on this one. It's a separate entrance. There is ample parking for at least 2 cars. Yes, it is in the residential area, but there are businesses around it, so that would tend to minimise a little bit your expectation of residential amenity, but not totally, as you would be in a commercial area, main high road. But nonetheless, I think given the circumstances, and there is a mixed use around, separate entrance, good car parking facility, I'm inclined to grant the appeal on this occasion for this particular property. Councillor Illingworth, it's academic what you say now, but have your chance.
I agree with my colleagues.
You have a unanimous decision, Mr. Elliott, then, to grant the appeal.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yes, unanimous decision to grant. That, of course, will be subject to suitable terms and conditions, informatives. And I think you basically said that you think this one, essentially because of its circumstances, it accords with the policy.
And that concludes our meeting today. Members, can I thank you for your presence and your help, Mr. Elliott, Kirsty, and Mr. Tierney, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much. That's the end of the meeting.